Silco can be a frustrating character to watch, especially after a certain someone comes under his care.
That's me!
The first 3 episodes establish Silco as clever and ruthlessly determined. He has spies throughout Zaun which allow him to stay 2 steps ahead, take advantage of stirring tensions, maneuver pawns into place, and so on and so forth. But after the time skip, after Silco has essentially taken Vander's place, using fear and manipulation rather than trust and cooperation to keep the topsiders out of Zaun, there is something glaringly different about this hardened villain. While perhaps not immediately obvious, he certainly has lost his edge. And this becomes apparent after the initial incident with Jinx. We saw quite early on how Silco handles reckless subordinates. He treats them as guinea pigs, disposable pawns. But even as throughout the show, people ceaselessly remind him of how Jinx is a problem, Silco merely disregards the warnings and chooses to shield her instead, even as he loses the respect of the Chem Barons, risking being overthrown by his own partners and teetering on the edge of open war with Piltover. He still shields Jinx. For all his cleverness and ruthlessness, he can't seem to raise a finger against the person using a sledgehammer to take out the ground from beneath his feet. He makes some sort of attempt to contain the situation in the beginning, telling Jinx to take some time off. But after that completely backfires, he just seems to give up. Silco is willfully blind to the situation, all because he sees himself in Jinx. Jinx is a sad sort of validation of this grandiose idea that he has of himself, causing him to have an inaccurate view of Jinx by extension. And he's not the only one with an inaccurate view of her. Just as Powder was underestimated, so is Jinx. Throughout the series, she is repeatedly referred to as a problem.
She's a problem and we all know it.
But Jinx isn't a problem. She's a catastrophe. She is constantly blindsiding people. She blindsides the Firelights. She blindsides the Enforcers when she steals the gemstone. She blindsides everyone on the bridge. She blindsides Silco and Caitlyn and Vi, even though most of these people recognize that she is a present threat. And in all of these cases, people die. Jinx is someone to live in constant fear of, but she's not treated that way because of how people view her. She's seen as unhinged, so people disregard how clever she actually is. When Silco learns of Vi's return, he scrambles to hide it from Jinx, but she finds out almost immediately. Jinx sees past Silco's bluster with all his talk of being betrayed and reborn, and openly considers it boring and deserving of mockery.
He was like a brother to you, and he turned his back, and blah, blah, blah.
With all his rants and his hard-won lessons. Excise your doubts, Jinx. Be what they fear, Jinx. Like everything was the same as when Vander left him.
I think to an extent Jinx even recognizes that Silco is using her for self-validation. And the reality is that she is using him for the very same purpose. And another delicious irony in all of this is that for all Silco's attempts to erase Powder, he may be the very thing keeping her alive. In the final episode, Jinx states point blank that it was Vi who created her, not Silco.
Silco thinks he made Jinx, but he didn't make Jinx. You did.
Jinx was born of destruction and hate, and when she's around Vi or even thinking of Vi, we see her Jinx side surface much more strongly. But when she's around Silco, we see the playful and eager to please little girl Powder resurface. Jinx even makes it quite clear that she doesn't want Vi to see Powder in her anymore, but rather accept Jinx.
It's Jinx now. Powder fell down a well.
I thought maybe you could love me like you used to, even though I'm different.
but there are no such indications when she's around Silco. Quite the opposite, in fact. The more he tries to separate her from the only remaining tether to her old life, the more she pushes back, the more she seeks to reach out to Vi. And in the end, through killing Silco, she finally kills Powder. And although she mourns for Silco, and thus Powder too, as losing a part of yourself is painful, the cruel truth ultimately comes to light. Jinx never really needed Silco, but Powder did. And yet Silco's sheer denial remains. Even as he is dying from the wounds that Jinx inflicted, he insists.
Don't cry. You're perfect.
But all things considered, he never really knew Jinx. He burned himself and his dream to the ground, all for a false self-projection, until the true person underneath suddenly arose and snuffed him out. In the end, Silco was a tragic nothing. While Jinx does emulate him in some respects, reflecting his former cleverness and ruthlessness, she is not him, and Silco's own arrogance prevented him from ever seeing that.
Is there anything so undoing as a daughter?
Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for future content. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're looking for more ways to show your support, consider becoming a patron, link in the description. As always, massive thanks to those of you who are already patrons. Your support is hugely appreciated. Don't forget to stay loud and proud, folks. I'm your Alibi, and I will see you next time. We saw quite early on how We saw quite early on how Silco handles reckless